It took us 16 years to get to this point, but now we're finally here, as all of the Signer Dragons now have an associated archetype with it, and the last in the line to get this treatment is the subject of our archetype analysis, that being the Ancient Fairy Dragon, which was used by Ruka, the second female Signer in 5Ds. And yeah, it's in the recent support wave of Alliance Insight, we have 11 cards in total to talk about, but we'll be skimming over 3 of them because we've talked about them prior in other reviews. So, of course, the first card of such, status is Ancient Fairy Dragon, which is the namesake of the archetype and yeah, I talked about this in the Signer Dragon archetype analysis, and all I can say about this card is that it's still a fairly useful card, even though the Yarada has axed off quite a number of its utility points ever since its ban and today. But yeah, it's still a versatile card, but nowhere near as good as it used to be prior to the Yarada. The same can be said about Ancient Pixie Dragon in a way, which is the manga counterpart of Ancient Fairy Dragon. The utility is obvious with this one, however, it's not nearly as useful as the original, plus, due to the way how the archetype is structured, you might have to cut down on this card for quite a bit when deck building your extra deck with this one. And the last card we'll be skimming over is Kuribon, because I already talked about this thing in the Kuribo archetype analysis. And unless you're playing a Nurseburn deck, I would not recommend sticking this thing in your deck because it would cause more harm than good. The same can't be said, however, for its retrain, which is our proper start to the archetype, Kuribon the Fairy Spirit. If you control Ancient Fairy Dragon or a light beast, plant, or fairy monster, yeah, that's the moniker we're going here, folks, buckle down, boys and girls, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, it is treated as a tuner. If another Ancient Fairy Dragon or monster that mentions that you control will be destroyed by a card effect, you can return this card from the field to the hand instead, and you can only use this effect once per turn. Yeah, so immediately this card's utility is pretty obvious. It allows you to swarm the field without using your Ancient Fairy Dragon effect to essentially lock yourself out of a battle phase. To do it, plus it also becomes a tuner, which is also fairly important for their newest boss monster, which we'll get to in a short while. And the graveyard effect is also, well, not the graveyard effect, but the protection effect. I call it the graveyard effect because it's a secondary effect that the card has, which is not correct since, again, it's triggered from the field. So, word of habit, I guess, it just slips out when you're talking about things like that. So anyway, it's also pretty good. It also affects all of the monsters that mention the name of the original Ancient Fairy Dragon, which is again the moniker that we are going for in this archetype, so I guess it's not all bad. So it's just something to keep in mind when looking at future support. If it's worded a bit differently, the interactions might be a bit different, as it always is when talking about the cards from a specific set or archetype. Next up, we have another card which was previously unrelated to the archetype, and that being Spore. If this card is in your graveyard, you can banish one other plant monster from your graveyard, special summon this card, and if you do, increase its level by the level of the banished monster, and this is a once per duel effect. Yeah, and this card is pretty famous for all the right reasons. It was basically Glow Up Bulb several years before Glow Up Bulb even existed. However, it used to be a bit trickier to work with than Glow Up Bulb because the level raise was mandatory, and depending on your graveyard setup, you always had something to banish that was true, due to how well this card synergizes with the good old plant synchro strategy. However, the levels might not get intact depending on what you were banishing, and of course the once per duel restriction was most likely on errata, because this thing did used to spend some time on the limited list prior to receiving an errata. I think that the once per duel, that it used to be like a hard once per turn or something like that. I'm not too sure, but I think this card was errata to kind of weaken it before it went back to 3 in the following formats. The reason why we're talking about it is because it received a retrain in the form of Spore the Fairy Cell. Same level and higher stats than the Kuribon, but this one's a tuner naturally. And if this card is special summoned, you can increase its level by the number of monsters you control. Up to number of monsters you control, I should say. And if this card is in your graveyard and you control an Ancient Fairy Dragon or a Light Beast, Plant, or Fairy monster, you can special summon this card. Also, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn except Synchro monsters. And you can only use this effect once per turn. Okay, so this one is kind of more forgiving, but way less generic when it comes to activating its effects, and that was pretty much intentional since they wanted to lock this thing into the archetype regardless. Again, I would still, I mean, it is a modulative leveler, which means you can do a whole lot with it. But in terms of in the vacuum of its own archetype, I would still tip my hat a bit closer to Kuribon, simply because of that protection effect, which can be fairly useful. While this thing is essentially an extender and nothing but, while Kuribon can be both. If you run this, I wouldn't run 3 of them. Ratios depending again on the build, but I still would not run 3 of them. But it is highly searchable. You can go into this with Lone Fire Blossom as well. And yeah, again, the level raising is the most imprecise thing about this card. So again, watch with the ratios. The last card which we're mentioning by proxy is Regulus, which once per turn allows you to shuffle a field spell from your graveyard into the deck. Simple, very ineffective, and you don't run it. But we're not here for this card. We're here for its retrain, more likely, which is Regulus the Fairy Beast. Same stats as the original Regulus, and if this card is normal or special summoned, you can add a spell or trap card that mentions Ancient Fairy Dragon from your deck to your hand. During your main phase, you can special summon a level 4 or lower Light Beast, Plant, or Fairy monster from your hand in defense position. You can banish this card from your graveyard and target one field spell in your graveyard, place it on the bottom of the deck, and then draw 1 card. And this is again a once per turn effect. Much more useful than the OG Regulus, and like Kuribon and Spore potentially as well. It can also help you further your plays, which I'm all about, and yeah, this is definitely a staple as well, a definite 3-off. And yeah, if it was a bit more highly searchable, then yeah, this deck could have had a very promising and strong start. But due to him being a beast type and due to those not, having lots of support in the first place, yeah, it's a bit of an uphill battle, but it can work, so yeah, go nuts. Their last monster is our first extra deck monster, which is Ancient Fairy Life Dragon, a level 8 in comparison to the original, which was level 7, and a completely generic synchro at 2500 attack and 3300 defense. And if it's synchro summoned, you get to draw a card, or if the World of Spirits is on the field, you can instead add a Light Beast, Plant, or Fairy monster, or an Eternal Sunshine from your deck to your hand instead. You can use this effect of Ancient Fairy Life Dragon once per turn. Your Ancient Fairy Dragon and monsters that mention it can attack while in face-up defense position. If they do, apply their defense for damage calculation. So this is something that I honestly did not see coming when I saw the new support for Ancient Fairy Dragon, is that this thing was essentially gonna turn all the related stuff into super heavy samurais. Not very Ruka-esque, if you get my drift, but I can't blame them for it because Ancient Fairy Dragon for a level 7 had some absurdly high defense points for some reason. And the cards that it mentioned, the World of Spirits and Eternal Sunshine, are the last 2 cards we'll be taking a look at shortly after, the World of Spirits being their field spell and the other card being their continuous trap. We'll get to those soon, but yeah, this is, I guess, what I would expect from this boss monster in some form or shape. Again, I was waiting for something for this card to utilize their defense points, their absurdly high defense points in some shape or form. I was expecting them kind of to mimic Ojamas in a way, to basically swap the attack and defense points of all monsters on the field, which included themselves, to make them absurdly high beaters. for their types and levels. But yeah, this also works. Again, it was unexpected, but it also works. But yeah, this is a great boss monster, and this is now why you would want to cut down on Ancient Pixie Dragon. It's because of its name. If it had the effect that it's always treated as Ancient Fairy Dragon, then Ancient Pixie Dragon would have been much more frequent inclusion in this dex list. But yeah, this effect does not affect Ancient Pixie Dragon, which I am bummed out, because you in some situations you do need the utility of Ancient Pixie Dragon, and the way it just cuts it off like that with this effect, and due to how the whole archetype is structured, yeah, it can kind of suck at points. So yeah, that's why you watch out with the ratios. As for this card, you obviously run at least 2 of these, and yeah, it's no questions asked. So yeah, this is also the artwork is also really good for like something we've been waiting for a long time. Yeah, this one's good. Well, let's move on. And move on we shall into their semi-final card, their field spell, the World of Spirits. When this card is activated, you can add a monster that mentions Ancient Fairy Dragon from your deck to your hand. You can only activate each of the following effects of the World of Spirits while you control a level 7 or higher Light Dragon Synchro monster. Each time a monster is special summoned in attack position, change it to defense position. Once per turn during the end phase, destroy all the turns of the player's attack position monsters, and you can only use this effect once per turn. Wow, I was actually also kind of impressed when I saw this, because they also kind of referenced the field spell that Ruka used in the anime, which is the Ancient Forest, which had the effect that it would destroy any monster at the end of the turn which declared an attack. This is actually a much stronger version of that effect, while also not locking you out of attacking yourself and allowing you to further your plays. And essentially, if you open this with the Ancient Fairy Life Dragon, it's essentially a +2 in card advantage, which is actually really nice when talking about this archetype in particular. However, locking you out of its effects while you don't have a synchro on the field, and to be precise, a level 7 or higher Light Dragon synchro, is kind of nuts. And yeah, it's the biggest pill to swallow with this card's effect, because while you do have quite a substantial toolbox of level 7 or higher Light Dragon Synchro monsters, you most likely will always be relying on the Ancient Fairy Dragon combo line, and if you get locked out of it, it's pretty much scooping until you can somehow maybe get to draw an out or something like that. It's kind of like, it's nowhere near as bad as the Arcana Force field spell, the Light Barrier, but it can occasionally bite you in the ass, which is kind of why I'm throwing this precaution out the window now. So yeah, it can be a bit daunting, but this is still a fantastic 3 due to how much of a card advantage and how much of a lockdown it can potentially generate for you, for the opponent, if you set it up just right. And our final card for today is Eternal Sunshine, a continuous trap that says monsters you control gain 500 defense for each Ancient Fairy Dragon and a monster that mentions it, that you control. And once per chain you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls, and until the end of this turn its current attack and defense become halved. Also its effects are negated. You can only use this effect of Eternal Sunshine a number of times up to the number of Ancient Fairy Dragon and our monsters that mention it that you control. So obviously the field is also, yeah, I love the art. It's actually referencing what Ancient Fairy Dragon did in the duel against the Demok with the guy that had the monkey Earthbound Immortal. And yeah, that scarf is also an equip spell, which we never saw in the real game, which is Pain to Power, I think it was called. But that basically increases a monster's attack based on the damage you've endured so far, which is also, yeah, kind of a one-trick pony as well. But anyway, back to this card. Obviously the intention is here to build up the field with as many Ancient Fairy Dragons and monsters that mention it on the field, which you can do, but the main deck ones usually tend to go to the graveyard for synchro spamming, for creating more end boards, and the most you're gonna get out of this is like 1 or 2 halvings and negates at once, which is kind of lackluster, but still, it's still far from terrible. So, and due to it being very easily searchable, I would not run more than one of these, even though, yeah, again, it can be good, but I just wouldn't max out on it because some better in forms of interruption and ways of floodgating your opponent do exist that are not as tricky to get into, and they don't require you to build an extensive field or a simple or an elaborate setup to get them to work. So yeah, run one at most if you feel like it. Alright, now it's time for the grades. In terms of consistency, the field spell combined with if you open it with their new boss monster, which is really easy to summon, can net you some pretty good starts if you open up well with the rest of your hand. Some of the hand traps are also type reliant, or I shouldn't say type reliant, they're type friendly with the deck you're playing, so I'm gonna say that in terms of consistency this is a clear 2 out of 3, even though it still has some hiccups here and there. Power gets a very generous 3, because 3 out of 3 I should say, because it's an archetype focused on smashing things with their defense values while locking the opponent out of doing attacks of their own. Realistically, this would be a 2 out of 3, but sometimes if you're lucky enough, you can cripple the opponent so hard that it's basically feels like a 3 out of 3, so that's why I'm being a little bit generous here. In terms of comeback ability, they're light monsters, which is the second most dominant monster type in the game. Plus, they have some life point related shenanigans with, you know, Ancient Fairy Dragon's field spell searching, and some other cards are also, you know, some other life point gain cost can actually be of use here, and also they are fairies and they also consist of fairies and plants and beasts. Plants are the most supported monster type out of all of them, fairies as well, so Valhalla's an option. Lonefire Blossom can also kickstart some of your combos and restart your engine when you fall down. So this is another generous 2 out of 3 when it comes to that. As for protection, again, I am going to be a little bit generous here and give them a 3 out of 3, because Kuriban can save you from quite a bit of interruption as well. We have Archlord Christia, which can also gain some of that protection for you via lockdowns, and you know, I'll go into more of this when it comes to the versatility of the deck as well. But and also Ancient Fairy Dragon itself is like a subject of defensive plays due to the fact that it basically constantly is protecting you with its high defense points while also using those to inflict some massive damage. So this is again another 2 out of 3, simply because of essentially being the hard that form of hard-boiled protection, which is, you know, good old defense points, and in terms of any effect threats that you might encounter, Korriban can also pick up the slack there, and I'm sure future support could actually also give some other forms of protection as well, if we should get to them at some point or another. Now, when it comes to the versatility, this is not a field I'm particularly impressed with, due to the many number of different like monster types that we have here. We have beasts, fairies, and plants. Those are usually not ran in a deck together, and it makes them basically like fumble with what are we going to focus on. Like, there's Lonefire Blossom to kickstart the plant stuff. We also have the Valhalla for fairies. Christia is there as a lockdown option if you are feeling kind of floodgatey with this archetype as well. And some hand traps are also type friendly, like I mentioned in the consistency part of this analysis. And we also have the Ancient Fairy Dragon, dragons altogether being ran in non-archetypal decks that that usually revolve around field spells or defensive maneuvers or anything like that. So yeah, Ancient Fairy Dragon again is one of the best synchros ever made. Suddenly, like it wasn't years prior, it was basically a joke. It was the worst signer card out of the 6 of them. Yes, even worse than Blackwing Dragon. But now it's suddenly the best one, and it's still seeing play in Tenpai decks, which is again a strategy completely unrelated to whatever is being shown here by proxy, I should say. So in terms of versatility, I'm going to cut them a little bit of slack, and even though realistically this should be a 1 out of 3 in terms of versatility, because I honestly cannot think of too many decks at the moment that they synergize with, but by themselves and because of the fact that their boss monsters are so legendary, I'm going to cut them some slack and give them a 2 out of 3 in that regard as well. So yeah, this is a solid start, I would say. I don't know how they would go about creating new support. I'm totally calling it that one of their newest monsters is going to be a retrain of Sunlight Unicorn, which is another very common monster used by Ruka in the show. And that monster had the effect related to searching equip spells. So maybe we could get something like a Moon Mirror Shield. That's something I could see potentially happening with this. I wouldn't honestly mind some more effect-based protection, because while as great as Kuriboh is, it's still a once per turn effect, and you still need to have him on the field, which severely dampens his usage. Something that triggers from the graveyard would be absolutely fantastic in terms of most optimal protection for this set of cards. And yeah, all we can do now is to see how it goes. Anyway, that does it for this archetype analysis. We'll see if this is my final video of 2024. It should very well be, but Maze of the Master still has a brand new archetype analysis in the works for me. We'll see whenever those cards get revealed what we'll do then. When they get revealed, it probably won't be this year. It probably will be like in the early stages of January next year, when that set is set to release on March, in mid-March of 2025. So yeah, it's a Dual Monsters era archetype. You most likely know what archetype it is, but yeah, we'll see how good that is, how good that archetype is, and when we'll get to review it. By my estimate, like I said, I think it should be somewhere in January. But if it's early enough to be this year, then we might still have one more video to record for this year. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for more Res Walkthroughs and updates. Have yourselves a great day, and I will see you all next time.